The flight sergeant did not even look up from his clipboard when he told her no. Corinne Vashon stood at the edge of the tarmac with her equipment bag slung over one shoulder, watching the Black Hawk crew run through their pre-flight checks, and she understood exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. She had met 1,000 men like Flight Sergeant Benitez in her 22 years of service. Men who made decisions with their assumptions rather than their eyes. Before we continue with Corinne's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed moments when someone's true worth was hidden beneath a humble appearance. "Ma'am, the flight manifest is full," Benitez said, still focused on his paperwork. "Civilian contractors ride standby only. You could try again tomorrow." Corinne did not argue. She had stopped arguing with men like this a long time ago. Instead, she simply nodded and stepped back from the staging area, her hand drifting unconsciously to the faded patch on her contractor jacket. The patch was nearly black, so worn that the original design had become almost invisible. A skull with wings. Roman numerals beneath it. 23 years of sweat and sun and memory had turned it into little more than a shadow on the fabric. But it was the most important thing she owned. She watched the crew chief, a young woman named Yoon, loading the last of the cargo. Yoon moved with efficiency, her hands quick and sure. Corinne noted the precision of her work, the way she double-checked each tie down without being told. Good instincts, the kind that kept people alive. Captain Dorn emerged from the operations building and strode toward the aircraft with the particular swagger of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was tall, square-jawed, and carried himself like a recruiting poster. Corinne recognized the type immediately. Legacy officer. Family name. The kind who confused inherited privilege with earned respect. Dorn noticed her standing at the edge of the tarmac, and his lip curled slightly. He changed course, walking directly toward her. "You the contractor trying to bum my passengers," he said. It was not a question. "I requested transport to the forward logistics point," Corinne replied evenly. "I was told the manifest was full." Dorn looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. "Logistics coordinator, right? Civilian support staff?" "That is correct." He snorted. "Let me give you some advice. The Army does not exist to taxi civilians around the theater. You want a ride? You wait your turn. Better yet, take a convoy like the rest of the support people." Corinne felt the familiar cold settle into her chest. The temperature she had learned to maintain in situations far worse than this one. "I understand, Captain. I will make other arrangements." She turned to leave, but Dorn was not finished. "Hey," he called out. "What is that on your jacket? Some kind of unit patch?" Corinne paused. Her hand went to the faded emblem again, a motion so habitual she barely noticed it anymore. "Just something from a long time ago." Dorn laughed. "Let me guess. Your husband served, and you were his old gear to feel important?" The cold in her chest dropped another 10 degrees. "My husband is dead, Captain." For a moment, something flickered across Dorn's face. It might have been shame, but it passed quickly, replaced by the defensive arrogance of a man who would rather double down than admit fault. "Well," he said, "that is unfortunate, but it does not change the manifest. You will have to find another way." He walked back to the helicopter without another word. Corinne watched him go. She did not allow her expression to change. She had learned a long time ago that showing pain to men like Wesley Dorn only encouraged them. She was about to turn away when she noticed a young soldier standing near the operations building. A private first class, barely 19 by the look of her. The young woman was surrounded by 3 male soldiers who were clearly giving her a hard time. Their body language told the whole story. Shoulders angled inward, crowding her space. Grins that were not friendly. Corinne adjusted her bag and walked toward the group. As she approached, she caught fragments of the conversation. The young woman, whose name tape read Osei, was trying to maintain her composure while the men mocked her. "Combat arms selection," one of them said. "You? Sweetheart, you would wash out in the first week." "I have met the physical standards," Osei replied, her voice tight. "Standards do not mean anything when real shooting starts." Another soldier laughed. "You want my advice? Stick to admin work. Leave the fighting to people built for it." Corinne stopped a few feet away. She did not raise her voice. "Excuse me, Private. Could you point me toward the convoy coordination office?" The three men turned, annoyed at the interruption. Osei looked at her with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "It is the building behind the motor pool, ma'am," Osei said. "I can show you if you want. That will be helpful." Corinne looked at the three men with an expression of mild disinterest. "Thank you for your time, gentlemen." She walked with Osei away from the group. Once they were out of earshot, she spoke quietly. "Combat arms selection?" "Yes, ma'am." Osei's jaw was tight. "I put in my packet last month." "Good." Corinne did not slow her pace. "Those men back there, you are going to meet a lot more like them. The ones who tell you that you do not belong before you have even had a chance to prove yourself." Osei was quiet for a moment. "How do you deal with it?" Corinne considered the question. "You remember that their opinion is not the test. The test is the test. You pass it or you do not. Everything else is noise." They reached the convoy office. Corinne paused at the door. "What is your name, Private?" "Amada Osei, Mum." Corinne nodded. "Good luck with your selection, Private Osei. I hope you make it." She went inside to arrange her alternative transport. It would take 6 hours longer than the helicopter, but she had learned patience in places far harder than Camp Humphreys. Later that evening, walking back to her quarters, Corinne passed the base memorial board. She almost walked by without stopping. She had seen 1,000 memorial boards in her career, but a name caught her eye. She stopped. Read it again. Staff Sergeant William Renner. Killed in action, 15 March. Billy Renner. She had not thought about him in years. Young kid from Ohio who had served under her husband during the early days. She remembered him laughing at some terrible joke Marcus had told, his whole face lighting up. Now his name was on a board. Her hand went to the patch. Marcus, Billy, 11 others whose names she carried in her memory like stones. For just a moment, standing alone in the fading light, her composure cracked. Not visibly, not in any way a passerby would notice. But inside, in the place where she kept 23 years of grief locked away, something shifted. She straightened her shoulders and kept walking. Tomorrow she would try again for transport. Tomorrow she would continue the work that brought her here in the first place. Tomorrow she would be the calm, competent contractor that everyone saw. But tonight, alone in her quarters, she would allow herself to remember. The convoy departed at 04:30 the next morning. Corinne sat in the back of an armored vehicle with 6 other personnel, none of whom spoke to her. She did not mind the silence. She had grown comfortable with it over the years. The route to the forward logistics point wound through 40 kilometers of South Korean countryside before reaching the military installation. What should have taken 20 minutes by helicopter would take nearly 7 hours by ground. Corinne used the time to review the equipment manifests on her tablet, looking for the discrepancy that had brought her here in the first place. 3 shipments of communications equipment had been logged as delivered over the past 2 months. The receiving unit claimed they never arrived. Somewhere between departure and destination, nearly $200,000 worth of military hardware had vanished. On paper, it looked like a clerical error. Corinne suspected it was something else entirely. The convoy stopped twice for security checks. During the second stop, Corinne stepped out to stretch her legs and noticed one of the supply trucks had an improperly secured load. Straps that should have been crossed were running parallel. A hard stop would send the cargo shifting. She approached the driver, a young specialist who looked like he had not slept in 2 days. "Your tie-downs need adjustment," she said. "The load will shift if you brake suddenly." The specialist looked at her contractor badge and frowned. "Ma'am, I've been driving supply runs for 8 months. I know how to secure a load." Corinne did not argue. She simply pointed to the rear left corner of the cargo bed. "That crate is sitting on a pressure point. When the straps loosen from road vibration, and they will, it is going to slide. If it slides, it is going to take the 2 crates behind it with it. You will lose about $60,000 worth of equipment and possibly injure whoever is riding in the vehicle behind you." The specialist stared at her. Then he looked at the cargo bed. His face changed as he realized she was right. "How did you know that?" he asked. Corinne shrugged. "I have seen a lot of cargo." She helped him adjust the straps, showing him the cross pattern that would hold under stress. He thanked her quietly, something like respect entering his voice. She nodded and returned to her vehicle without another word. The convoy reached the forward logistics point by late morning. Corinne spent the next 4 hours reviewing records, interviewing personnel, and tracing the missing shipments through every checkpoint in the system. By mid-afternoon, she had found what she was looking for. The discrepancy was not clerical. It was deliberate. Someone had altered the delivery confirmations after the fact. The timestamps were wrong. Subtle, almost invisible, but wrong. Whoever had done this knew the system well enough to cover their tracks, but not well enough to fool someone who had spent 2 decades learning how military logistics actually worked. Corinne photographed the evidence with her phone and stored it in an encrypted folder. She did not report it yet. Experience had taught her that corruption rarely existed in isolation. If someone was stealing equipment, someone else was usually protecting them. She needed to know how high it went before she made any moves. The return convoy was not scheduled until the following morning, so Corinne found a bunk in the transient quarters and settled in for the night. She was reviewing her notes when her phone buzzed with a message from the Camp Humphreys administrative office. Her base access was under review pending investigation of a complaint filed by Captain Wesley Dorn. Corinne read the message twice. Then she set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Dorn was moving faster than she had expected. He must have filed the complaint within hours of their encounter on the tarmac. The accusation was vague but damaging. Inappropriate conduct toward military personnel, misrepresentation of credentials, the kind of charges that were nearly impossible to disprove because they required proving a negative. She thought about the evidence on her phone, the equipment theft she had uncovered. Without base access, she could not file a proper report, could not follow the trail any further, could not do the job she had been sent here to do. Dorn probably did not even know about the theft. He was just a petty man protecting his ego. But the timing could not have been worse. Her hand went to the patch on her jacket. She had removed the jacket but kept it close, draped over the chair beside her bunk. The faded emblem caught the dim light from the window. She picked up the jacket and held it, running her thumb over the worn fabric. 23 years since Marcus had pressed this patch into her hands. 23 years since she had carried him out of the darkness only to watch him die in the helicopter on the way to the surgical unit. She still remembered his last words. "Keep going, Reaper. Get them home." She had gotten them home. 11 survivors who would have died in that valley if she had not dragged them out one by one. Colonel Okonkwo, though he had only been a captain then, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, barely conscious. Staff Sergeant Womack with 2 broken legs. Sergeant Chun with burns over 40% of his body. She had carried them all, and then she had gone back for Marcus. But Marcus was already gone by the time she reached him. The doctors said he had known, that he had sent her away because he knew he was dying and did not want her to watch, that his final order had been his last gift to her. Some gift. 23 years of carrying his memory. 23 years of wearing his patch and saying nothing when people asked about it. 23 years of serving in the shadows because the missions they had run together would never be acknowledged. Task Force Erebus. 23 operators who officially never existed, running operations that officially never happened. 11 dead. 12 survivors scattered across the world, most of them retired, a few still serving in quiet roles like hers. She had never traded on the name, never demanded recognition. The patch was not about her. It was about the people who had earned it, the people who had given everything. But sometimes, in moments like this, she wondered if Marcus would have wanted her to fight harder, to stop accepting the disrespect, to stop letting men like Dorn treat her like she was nothing. She folded the jacket carefully and set it aside. Tomorrow she would return to Camp Humphreys. Tomorrow she would face whatever accusations Dorn had manufactured. Tomorrow she would find a way to continue the work, because that was what she did. That was what Marcus had asked of her. Keep going, Reaper. Get them home. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. The next morning brought news that made everything worse. Corinne was eating breakfast in the dining facility when Chief Warrant Officer Yoon sat down across from her. "I heard about the complaint," Yoon said quietly. "Captain Dorn filed it the same day you asked about the flight. I wanted you to know that I saw what happened." You did not do anything wrong. Corinne studied the younger woman. Yoon had kind eyes, but a guarded expression. The look of someone who wanted to help, but was afraid of the cost. I appreciate that, Corinne said. But getting involved with this could cause problems for you. Yoon shook her head. I have watched Captain Dorn do this before. Not always to women, but always to people he thinks cannot fight back. Last year, it was a Korean linguist who corrected his pronunciation in front of his crew. He made her life miserable until she requested transfer. Corinne nodded slowly. Men like Dorn usually have patterns. Yoon hesitated. Then she leaned closer. That patch on your jacket. I have seen it before. Once, in a classified briefing about operations that officially never happened. I do not know who you are, but I know that patch is real. And I know someone who might be able to help. She pressed a folded piece of paper into Corinne's hand. Colonel Marcus Okonkwo. He runs Joint Special Operations Coordination for the Pacific Theater. I do not know why, but I think you want to know you are here. Corinne looked at the paper. The name hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Okonkwo, the young captain she had carried out of that valley 23 years ago. The man whose life she had saved while her husband lay dying. She had not spoken to him since the memorial service. Thank you, she said softly. Yoon stood to leave. Then she paused. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that not everyone here is like Captain Dorn. Some of us see more than he thinks we do. She walked away, leaving Corinne alone with the paper and the weight of 2 decades of silence. The convoy back to Camp Humphreys gave Corinne 7 hours to think about the paper in her pocket. 7 hours to debate whether she would use it. She had spent 23 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. The moment when her past would intersect with her present. The moment when she would have to choose between her pride and her principles. Marcus Okonkwo had been 26 years old the night everything fell apart. A young captain on his first special operations assignment, attached to Task Force Erebus as a liaison officer. He was not supposed to be in the field that night, but the mission had gone sideways, and everyone who could hold a weapon had been needed. She remembered him bleeding in the sand, trying to give her his sidearm, because he thought she would need it more than he would. She remembered telling him to shut up and save his strength. She remembered the weight of him across her shoulders as she navigated 3 kilometers of hostile terrain in the dark. And she remembered his face at the memorial service 2 months later. The guilt in his eyes when he looked at her. The way he had tried to say something, and she had turned away because she could not bear to hear it. She had not blamed him for surviving. She had blamed herself for not being fast enough to save Marcus too. The convoy reached Camp Humphreys by late afternoon. Corinne went directly to the administrative office to address the complaint against her. The clerk behind the desk was sympathetic but unhelpful. The complaint is under review, ma'am. Until it is resolved, your access privileges are suspended. You can remain on base in transient housing, but you cannot access secure areas or military systems. Corinne kept her voice level. How long will the review take? Hard to say. Could be a few days. Could be a few weeks. Depends on how much evidence Captain Dorn provides. Evidence of what exactly? The clerk shifted uncomfortably. The complaint alleges that you misrepresented your credentials and attempted to use false military affiliations to obtain priority transport. False military affiliations. Corinne almost laughed. I served 22 years in the Marine Corps. I retired as a master sergeant. My service record is a matter of public record. The clerk nodded. I understand, ma'am. But until the review is complete, there is nothing I can do. Corinne left the office and walked across the base toward transient housing. The afternoon sun was harsh, and the air smelled like diesel and dust. She passed a group of soldiers conducting physical training on the parade ground and felt the familiar ache of missing the life she had once lived. She was halfway to her quarters when she heard someone calling her name. She turned to find Private First Class Osei jogging toward her. The young woman was out of breath, but smiling. Ma'am, I heard what happened. The whole logistics section is talking about it. Corinne raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Osei fell in a step beside her. Sergeant Hutchins has been telling everyone that you got caught pretending to be a veteran. He says Captain Dorn exposed you as a fraud. Sergeant Hutchins. He is one of Captain Dorn's crew. Big guy, always laughing at his own jokes. He has been spreading the story all morning. Corinne processed this information. Dorn was not just filing complaints. He was running a campaign, destroying her reputation before she even had a chance to defend herself. "What else is Hutchins saying?" she asked. Osei hesitated. "He says the patch on your jacket is fake, that you bought it online to impress people. He says real operators would never wear their unit insignia on civilian clothes." Corinne stopped walking. She looked at Osei, really looked at her, and made a decision. "Private, what I am about to tell you stays between us. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. That patch belonged to my husband. He was killed in action 23 years ago during an operation that has never been officially acknowledged. I wear it to remember him and the 10 other men who died alongside him. It is not fake. It is the most real thing I own." Osei's expression changed. The casual curiosity was replaced by something deeper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I did not know. You could not have known. That is the point." Corinne resumed walking. "The people who served in that unit do not talk about it. The missions we ran are still classified. The sacrifices that were made have never been recognized. And men like Sergeant Hutchins get to stand around making jokes about things they could never understand." They reached the transient housing building. Osei stopped at the entrance. "Ma'am, if there is anything I can do to help, just ask." Corinne considered the offer. "Actually, there's something. Keep your ears open. If you hear anything else about what Dorn or Hutchins are planning, let me know." Osei nodded. "I will." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mom, for what it is worth, I believe you. I do not know why, but I do." Corinne allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Private. That means more than you know." She went inside and found her assigned room. It was small and sparse, just a bunk, a desk, and a wall locker. She sat on the edge of the bed and took out the paper her unit had given her. Colonel Marcus Okonkwo, Joint Special Operations Coordination, Pacific Theater. She stared at the name until the letters blurred. The equipment theft was still out there. Someone on this base was stealing military hardware and covering their tracks. Without her access, she could not investigate further, could not file a report, could not do anything except sit in this room and wait for a review process designed to grind slowly. But if she called Okonkwo, everything would change. He would know who she was. He would know what the patch meant. He would have questions she was not sure she was ready to answer. 23 years of silence. 23 years of keeping her head down and doing the work without asking for recognition. Was she really going to break that silence now, just because some arrogant captain had hurt her feelings? No, that was not why. She was going to break that silence because soldiers were being put at risk, because equipment meant to protect American lives was disappearing into someone's pocket, because staying silent was no longer the same as staying honorable. She picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a young voice answered. "Colonel Okonkwo's office. How may I direct your call?" Corinne took a breath. "My name is Corinne Vashon. I need to speak with the colonel about a matter related to Task Force Erebus." There was a pause, a long pause. Then the voice returned, different now. "Careful. Please hold, ma'am." The whole music played for less than 30 seconds before the line clicked. "This is Colonel Okonkwo." His voice was deeper than she remembered. Older, but still familiar. "Colonel," Corinne said. "This is Master Sergeant retired Corinne Vashon. I do not know if you remember me." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, quietly, almost reverently, he spoke. "Reaper, my God, we thought you were dead." Corinne closed her eyes. "I was," she said, "for a while. But I came back." And just like that, 23 years of silence came to an end. The conversation with Colonel Okonkwo lasted 47 minutes. Corinne told him about the equipment theft, the altered records, and her suspicion that someone with system access was covering the trail. She told him about Captain Dorn and the complaint that had stripped her credentials. She told him everything except the real reason she had waited 23 years to reach out. Some wounds did not heal with words. Okonkwo listened without interrupting. When she finished, his voice was heavy with something she could not quite identify. "Corinne, I have spent 2 decades trying to find out what happened to you. After the memorial, you disappeared. No forwarding address. No contact information. I thought maybe you blamed me for surviving when Marcus did not. Corinne gripped the phone tighter. I never blamed you, Colonel. I blamed myself. For what? For not being fast enough. For carrying you out first instead of going back for him sooner. For following his orders when I should have ignored them. The silence between them was filled with a weight of shared grief. Marcus gave that order because he knew, Okonkwo said finally. He knew he was not going to make it. He sent you to save the rest of us because that was who he was. And you honored that. You saved 11 lives that night, Corinne. 11 families who still have their sons and daughters because of what you did. Corinne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She had not cried in years. She was not about to start now. Colonel, I did not call to revisit the past. I called because there's a problem on this base that needs attention, and I no longer have the access to address it myself. I understand. Okonkwo's voice shifted back to professional mode. I'm going to make some calls. The complaint against you will be reviewed by someone outside Captain Dorn's chain of command. In the meantime, I want you to document everything you have found about the equipment theft. I will be at Camp Humphreys tomorrow afternoon. You're coming here personally? That patch you wear means something, Corinne. It means you are one of 23 people who were trusted with missions that shaped the course of the War on Terror. It means you serve alongside the finest operators this country has ever produced. And it means that anyone who disrespects you disrespects every single one of them. So yes, I am coming there personally. The call ended, and Corinne sat in the quiet of her room, feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning brought a summons to the base administrative building. Corinne arrived at 0900 to find Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Ferris waiting for her in a conference room. Ferris was a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s with the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of military discipline. She did not smile when Corinne entered. Ms. Vashon, please sit down. Corinne took the offered chair. She noticed Captain Dorn sitting in the corner of the room, his expression smug and satisfied. I have reviewed the complaint filed against you, Ferris said, sliding a folder across the table. Captain Dorn alleges that you misrepresented your military credentials and attempted to use fraudulent affiliations to obtain priority transport. He further alleges that you were verbally aggressive toward his flight crew when denied boarding. None of that is accurate, Corinne said calmly. Dorn leaned forward. She claimed to have some kind of special operations background. She was wearing a fake unit patch and tried to intimidate my sergeant into giving her a seat. Corinne turned to look at him directly. Captain, I served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. I retired at the rank of Master Sergeant. My service record, my decorations, and my discharge papers are all matters of official record. The patch I wear belonged to my late husband, who was killed in action during a classified operation. Nothing about my credentials is fraudulent. Dorn's smirk faltered slightly. Anyone can claim to be a veteran. That does not make it true. Ferris held up a hand. Ms. Vashon, do you have documentation to support your service history? I could provide my DD-214 and service records within 24 hours. That will not be necessary. Ferris closed the folder. I have already verified your basic service history through official channels. You are indeed a retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant with an honorable discharge. Dorn's face reddened. Ma'am, with respect, that does not explain the patch. She is wearing insignia from a unit that does not exist. I checked the database myself. Ferris turned to him with a look that suggested she was losing patience. Captain, there are units that do not appear in standard databases. That does not mean they do not exist. It means their existence is classified above your clearance level. The room went silent. Dorn's smugness evaporated, replaced by uncertainty. However, Ferris continued, turning back to Corinne, until this matter is fully resolved, your base access will remain suspended. I'm not dismissing Captain Dorn's complaint. I am simply placing it under extended review. Corinne understood immediately. Ferris was buying time. Whether out of fairness or political calculation, she was not willing to rule against Dorn outright. Not yet. I understand, ma'am, Corinne said. May I ask how long the extended review will take? As long as necessary. Ferris stood, signaling the meeting was over. You are free to remain in transient housing. You will be notified when a determination is made. Corinne rose and walked toward the door. As she passed Dorn, he grabbed her arm. "This is not over," he said quietly. "I do not know who you think you are, but you do not belong here. And I'm going to prove it." Corinne looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes made him release his grip and take a step back. "Captain," she said softly, "you have no idea who I am, but you're about to find out." She left the room without looking back. Outside the building, she found Chief Warrant Officer Yoon waiting near the entrance. The younger woman fell into step beside her as she walked. "I heard the review is continuing," Yoon said. "That is better than an immediate ruling against you." Corinne nodded. "Lieutenant Colonel Ferris is being cautious. She does not want to side against Dorn without more information. She's afraid of his family." Yoon's voice dropped. "Dorn's father is a retired colonel with connections throughout Army aviation. He helped Ferris get her current posting. She owes him." That explains the hesitation. "What are you going to do?" Corinne thought about the encrypted files on her phone, the evidence of equipment theft that she could not report through official channels. The colonel who was flying in tomorrow to help her. "I'm going to wait," she said, "and I'm going to be ready." That evening, Corinne received a message from Osei. "Hutchins is planning something. He has been telling everyone that tomorrow they're going to give you a send-off you will never forget. I do not know what that means, but it does not sound good." Corinne read the message twice. Then she deleted it and went to sleep. Whatever Hutchins was planning, she had faced worse. Far worse. Corinne woke before dawn to the sound of laughter outside her window. She lay still for a moment, listening. The laughter was male, multiple voices, and it carried the particular edge of cruelty that she had learned to recognize over 2 decades of service. She rose quietly and moved to the window without turning on the light. In the gray pre-dawn darkness, she could see a group of figures gathered near the entrance to the transient housing building. 4 men, maybe 5. One of them was holding something, gesturing toward her window. She dressed quickly in the dark, choosing practical clothing and soft-soled shoes. Whatever was waiting for her outside, she intended to meet it on her feet. The hallway was empty when she opened her door. She moved silently toward the building's rear exit, a habit from years of operating in hostile environments. Never use the door they expect you to use. Never walk into an ambush you can avoid. She emerged into the cool morning air behind the building and circled around to observe the group from a concealed position near the maintenance shed. Sergeant Hutchins stood at the center of the gathering, holding a large cardboard sign. Even in the dim light, Corinne could read the words painted in red letters. "Fake veteran. Estolen valor." Fraud. The other men were laughing, passing around a phone that displayed what appeared to be her contractor identification photo. One of them was mimicking her voice in a high-pitched whine. "Please, Captain Dorn, I'm a real soldier. Please give me a seat on your helicopter." The laughter grew louder. Corinne felt the cold settle into her chest. The same cold that had carried her through firefights and ambushes and the worst night of her life. The temperature that turned fear into focus and anger into action. She could have confronted them. Part of her wanted to, but she had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting on the enemy's terms. Hutchins wanted a reaction. He wanted her to scream or cry or throw a punch so he could claim she was unstable. She would not give him that satisfaction. Instead, she pulled out her phone and recorded 30 seconds of video from her concealed position. The sign, the mocking, the faces of every man involved. Then she slipped back into the building through the rear entrance and returned to her room. She forwarded the video to 3 addresses: Chief Warrant Officer Yoon, Private First Class Osei, and Colonel Marcus Okonkwo. Then she sat on her bunk and waited for the sun to rise. By 0800, the video had begun to circulate. Corinne did not know who had shared it first, but by mid-morning, half the base seemed to have seen it. The reaction was mixed. Some soldiers thought it was funny. Others were disgusted. A few recognized the implications of what Hutchins had done. Stolen valor accusations were serious. If Corinne was telling the truth about her service, Hutchins and his group had just committed defamation against a decorated veteran. If she was lying, the video proved nothing except that some soldiers were cruel. Either way, the situation had escalated beyond a simple complaint about helicopter seats. Lieutenant Colonel Ferris summoned Corinne to her office at 1100 hours. This time, Dorn was not present. Ms. Vashon, I have seen the video. Ferris looked tired, more tired than she had the day before. I want you to know that I do not condone what Sergeant Hutchins did. But you're not going to do anything about it, Corinne said. Ferris sighed. It is complicated. Sergeant Hutchins claims it was just a joke. The men involved are all saying the same thing. Without evidence that they intended to cause actual harm, my options are limited. They publicly accused me of stolen valor. They created a sign calling me a fraud. How is that not intended to cause harm? Because they can claim they believed it was true. Ferris spread her hands. If I punish them for expressing a sincere belief, even if that belief is wrong, I open myself to accusations of suppressing free speech. It is a legal nightmare. Corinne stared at her. You know my service record is legitimate. You verified it yourself. I know, but Hutchins does not know that. And until there is an official determination that your credentials are authentic, he can claim he was acting in good faith. The circular logic was suffocating. Corinne was being denied the ability to prove her credentials while simultaneously being punished for credentials that had not been disproven. Ma'am, she said carefully, I have evidence of a serious crime being committed on this base. Equipment theft, falsified records, hundreds of thousands of dollars in military hardware disappearing. I have been trying to report it, but without access to the systems, I cannot file an official complaint. Ferris frowned. Equipment theft? Why am I just hearing about this now? Because my access was suspended before I could report it. And because I wanted to verify my findings before making accusations. She handed Ferris a printed summary of what she had discovered. The altered timestamps, the missing shipments, the pattern that suggested inside involvement. Ferris read the document in silence. When she finished, her expression had changed. This is serious. Yes, ma'am. And while Sergeant Hutchins is making jokes about fake veterans, whoever is stealing this equipment is still operating. Ferris set the document down. I will look into this. In the meantime, your access remains suspended pending the review of Captain Dorn's complaint. Corinne stood. Ma'am, with respect, how long are you going to let Captain Dorn dictate what happens on this base? Ferris did not answer. Corinne left the office and walked out into the midday sun. The base was busy with the usual activity. Soldiers moving between buildings. Vehicles rumbling along the roads. Helicopters lifting off from the flight line in the distance. She watched one of the Black Hawks climb into the sky and disappear over the hills. Somewhere behind her, a voice called out. There she is, the fake Marine. She did not turn around. She kept walking. More laughter. More mocking comments. The words blurred together into a wall of noise that she had learned to shut out decades ago. But beneath the cold focus, something else was stirring. Something she had kept buried for 23 years. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that led to mistakes. The slow, patient kind that waited for the right moment. The kind that had carried her through 3 kilometers of hostile territory with wounded men on her shoulders. The kind that had kept her moving when every muscle screamed for rest and every instinct begged her to stop. She reached her quarters and closed the door behind her. Colonel Okonkwo would arrive in a few hours, and when he did, everything would change. She sat on her bunk and looked at the patch on her jacket. Hold on, Marcus, she whispered. We're almost there. Colonel Marcus Okonkwo arrived at Camp Humphreys at 1437. He came without fanfare, dressed in civilian clothes, driving a rental car from the airport. Noed, Noentorafe, just a man who had waited 23 years to repay a debt he could never fully repay. He did not announce himself to base command. He did not check in with Lieutenant Colonel Ferris. Instead, he parked near the flight line and walked toward the staging area where Captain Dorn's crew was preparing for an afternoon training flight. Okonkwo had spent the flight from Japan reviewing everything he could find about Wesley Dorn. Family connections, service record, performance evaluations. The picture that emerged was of a mediocre officer coasting on inherited privilege. Adequate pilot skills, no combat deployments, a trail of complaints from subordinates that had been quietly buried by superiors who owed favors to his father. the kind of man who had never been tested and mistook that absence for strength. Okonkwo found a position near the maintenance hangar where he could observe without being noticed. He watched Dorn strut across the tarmac, barking orders at his crew. He watched Sergeant Hutchins laugh at something on his phone, probably the video that had been circulating all morning. He watched Chief Warrant Officer Yin keep her head down and her mouth shut, the posture of someone who had learned that speaking up only brought trouble. Then he saw Corinne. She was standing at the edge of the flight line, apart from everyone else, watching the helicopter preparations with an expression he recognized. The expression of someone who had been pushed to the edge of their patience, but refused to break. 23 years had changed her. The dark hair, he remembered, was now streaked with silver. The athletic build had softened slightly with age, but the eyes were the same, gray and calm and absolutely unreadable. And there, on her jacket, barely visible against the faded fabric, was the patch. Okonkwo's breath caught in his throat. He had seen that patch 1,000 times in his memory, in his nightmares, in the quiet moments when he allowed himself to remember the men and women who had worn it. The skull with wings, the Roman numeral 3, the symbol of Task Force Erebus. Only 23 people had ever been authorized to wear that patch. 11 of them were dead. The 12 survivors were scattered across the world, most of them living quiet lives far from the spotlight. Okonkwo had tried to track them down over the years, to thank them, to honor them. But Corinne Vachon had vanished completely after the memorial service. Until now, he started walking toward her. Dorn noticed the movement and intercepted him, stepping into his path with the automatic authority of a man who assumed he outranked everyone he met. "Sir, this area is restricted to authorized personnel. Flight crew only." Okonkwo did not slow down. He walked around Dorn without acknowledging him. "Sir." Dorn's voice sharpened. "I said this area is restricted." Okonkwo kept walking. His eyes were fixed on Corinne. The flight line had gone quiet. Crew members stopped what they were doing to watch. Hutchins lowered his phone. Yin looked up from her checklist. Corinne turned as he approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Okonkwo did something that no one on that flight line expected. He stopped 3 paces in front of her, drew himself to his full height, and rendered a perfect salute. "A colonel saluting a civilian contracteur." The silence was absolute. "Master Sergeant Vachon," Okonkwo said, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "It has been 23 years. Corinne's hand came up in a crisp return salute. The motion was automatic, ingrained by 2 decades of muscle memory. "Colonel, I see you made it after all." Okonkwo held the salute for a long moment before dropping his hand. Behind him, he could hear Dorn sputtering in confusion. He ignored it. "You carried me 3 kilometers through enemy territory with 2 rounds in your shoulder," Okonkwo said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "That patch you wear means you were Task Force Erebus. That patch means you were one of 23 operators trusted with missions that saved thousands of American lives. And that patch means every person who mocked you has mocked a hero they are not worthy to serve alongside." Corinne's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something that might have been relief. Dorn pushed forward, his face flushed. "Sir, I do not know who you are, but this woman is under investigation for fraudulent credentials. She has been spreading lies about her service record." Okonkwo turned slowly to face him. The temperature on the flight line seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Captain Dorn, I am Colonel Marcus Okonkwo, Joint Special Operations Command, Pacific Theater. And I am the man whose life this woman saved when you were still learning to tie your shoes." Dorn's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. 23 years ago, Okonkwo continued, I was a young captain attached to a unit that does not officially exist. We were ambushed during an operation that has never been acknowledged. 11 men died that night. I would have been the 12th, but Master Sergeant Vachon carried me through 3 kilometers of hostile terrain while taking fire. She saved my life and the lives of 10 other Americans. And she lost her husband in the process. He stepped closer to Dorn, close enough that the younger man had to look up to meet his eyes. The patch she wears belonged to her husband. He died, giving her the order to save the rest of us. She has worn it every day for 23 years, not for recognition, but for remembrance. And you, Captain, have spent the last week trying to destroy a woman who has sacrificed more for this country than you will ever understand. Dorn's face had gone white. Sir, I did not know. You did not bother to know. Okonkwo's voice was ice. That is worse. He turned back to Corinne. The hardness in his expression softened. I am sorry it took me so long to find you, he said quietly. I should have looked harder. Corinne shook her head. You had your own life to live, Colonel. Your own service to give. I did not want to be found. And now? She looked past him at Dorn, at Hutchins, at the crew members who had laughed at her and mocked her and called her a fraud. Now I want to finish what I started. Okonkwo nodded. Then let us finish it together. He turned to address the assembled personnel. His voice rang out across the flight line with the authority of a man who had spent 30 years commanding warriors. Effective immediately, Ms. Vashin's base access is restored. Any further harassment or interference will be dealt with through my office. And Captain Dorn, you will report to Lieutenant Colonel Ferris within the hour to explain why you filed a false complaint against a decorated veteran. He did not wait for a response. He offered Corinne his arm, and together they walked off the flight line. Behind them, the silence stretched on for a very long time. They walked in silence until they reached the administrative building. Corinne could feel the weight of dozens of eyes following them across the base. By nightfall, everyone at Camp Humphreys would know what had happened on the flight line. Okonkwo led her to a small conference room and closed the door behind them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he turned to face her, and the commanding officer was gone. In his place stood the young captain she had dragged through the sand 23 years ago. Vulnerable, grateful, haunted by the same ghosts she carried. I'll look for you, he said quietly. After the memorial, I went to your quarters, but you had already cleared out. No forwarding address. No contact information. It was like you had never existed. That was the idea. Corinne sat down heavily in one of the chairs. I cannot stay. Every time I looked at someone from the unit, I saw Marcus. Every time someone thanked me for saving them, I wanted to scream that I had not saved the one person who mattered. Okonkwo sat across from her. He did not try to touch her or offer empty comfort. He simply waited. The patch, she continued, touching the faded emblem on her jacket. He gave it to me in the helicopter. We were 30 seconds out from the extraction point, and he knew he was not going to make it. He pressed it in my hand and told me to keep going, to get everyone home. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I did not even get to say goodbye. By the time I turned around, he was gone. Okonkwo closed his eyes. I remember. I was fading in and out of consciousness, but I remember you screaming his name. The medics had to pull you away from him. Corinne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She had not talked about this in 23 years, had not allowed herself to remember the details. But now, sitting across from the man who had been there, the memories came flooding back. I wore his patch to the memorial service, she said. I thought someone would ask about it, would recognize what it meant. But no one did. The mission was classified. The unit was classified. Marcus was buried with full honors, but his real service was never acknowledged. That is why you disappeared. I cannot be around people who did not know, who would never know. So I took contractor jobs overseas, places where no one asked questions, where I could keep serving without having to explain why. Okonkwo leaned forward. Corinne, what happened that night was not your fault. Marcus made a choice. He chose to save his team instead of himself. That is not on you. I know that. She met his eyes. I have known it for 23 years. But knowing something and feeling are not the same thing. No, they are not. The silence between them was comfortable now. Two survivors of the same nightmare, finally able to share the weight they had been carrying alone. Tell me about the equipment theft, Okonkwo said eventually. His voice had shifted back to professional mode, and Corinne was grateful for the change. She walked him through everything she had discovered. The missing shipments, the altered timestamps, the pattern that suggested inside involvement. She showed him the photographs on her phone, the encrypted file she had compiled, the summary she had given Lieutenant Colonel Ferris. Okonkwo studied the evidence with the focused attention of a career intelligence officer. This is professional work, he said finally. Whoever is doing this knows the logistics system inside and out. That is what concerns me. Corinne pulled up another file. I started looking at who has access to the systems that were compromised. The list is short. Supply officers, senior NCOs in the logistics section, and flight crews who handle equipment transfers. Flight crews. Okonkwo looked up sharply. Like Captain Dorn's crew. Like Captain Dorn's crew. The implication hung in the air between them. You think Dorn is involved? I think his behavior toward me changed the moment I started asking questions about equipment manifests. Corinne shook her head. At first I assumed he was just another arrogant officer who did not like civilians. But the timing is too convenient. I arrived to investigate missing equipment, and within 48 hours I am facing a complaint designed to strip my access. Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. Dorn's father runs a military logistics contracting company. They handle surplus equipment sales throughout the Pacific Theater. Corinne felt the pieces clicking into place. So the equipment goes missing from the military supply chain and reappears in the civilian market through Daddy's company. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. The son provides access. The father provides the outlet. Everyone profits except the soldiers who needed that equipment. We need proof. We need more than proof. Okonkwo stood and walked to the window. If this goes as high as I think it does, we need to catch them in the act. Otherwise, Dorn's family will bury this the same way they buried every other complaint against him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Okonkwo opened it to find Chief Warrant Officer Yun standing in the hallway, looking nervous. Colonel, Ms. Vashon. She glanced over her shoulder. I should not be here, but I thought you should know. Sergeant Hutchins has been making calls since the incident on the flight line. I do not know who he is talking to, but he seems scared. Scared of what? Corinne asked. Yun hesitated. I heard him mention something about a shipment. He said they need to move up the timeline before someone starts asking questions. Okonkwo and Corinne exchanged glances. When is the shipment? Okonkwo asked. Tonight. Yun swallowed. There is a cargo flight scheduled for 2200. Hutchins is on the manifest as load supervisor. Corinne stood. That is our window. Yun looked between them, clearly uncertain about what she had walked into. Ma'am, I do not understand what is happening. All I know is that what Captain Dorn did to you is wrong, and whatever Hutchins is involved in feels wrong too. Corinne placed a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. You did the right thing by telling us. Now I need you to do something else. What? Go back to your duties. Act normal. Do not let anyone know you spoke to us. Corinne's voice was steady. Can you do that? Yun straightened. Yes, ma'am. Good. And Yun? Thank you for believing me when no one else did. The young warrant officer nodded once, then slipped back into the hallway. Okonkwo was already on his phone, making arrangements. He spoke in clipped, coded phrases that Corinne recognized from her years in special operations. Assets moving into position. Surveillance established. Extraction protocols confirmed. When he hung up, his expression was grim but determined. We have 6 hours, he said. Let's catch some thieves. The sun had set over Camp Humphreys by the time Corinne and Okonkwo finalized their plan. They sat in his rental car in the parking lot behind the transient housing building, watching the base settle into its nighttime rhythm. Okonkwo had called in favors from contacts throughout the Pacific Theater. Military police units were standing by. Criminal Investigation Command agents were en route. A surveillance team had eyes on the cargo staging area where Hutchins would be supervising the loading operation. All they needed now was evidence. The shipment is scheduled to depart at 2200, Okonkwo said, reviewing the flight manifest on his tablet. Communications equipment, officially destined for a forward operating location in the Philippines. Hutchins is listed as load supervisor. Dorn is listed as aircraft commander. Corinne studied the manifest. The equipment matches the pattern I identified. High-value items that are easy to resell on the civilian market. Radios, encryption modules, night vision components. If they are planning to divert the shipment, they will have to alter the documentation somewhere between loading and departure. Okonkwo looked up. That is where we catch them, assuming they go through with it. Corinne frowned. Hutchins knows something is wrong. He might abort. He might. But men like Hutchins do not think long-term. They see an immediate threat and react to it. Right now, he is scared. Scared people make mistakes. The radio on Okonkwo's belt crackled softly. Overwatch to command. Target 1 is moving toward the cargo area. Looks like he is early. Okonkwo keyed the radio. Copy, Overwatch. Maintain visual. Do not engage. He turned to Corinne. Hutchins is on the move. We need to get into position. They left the car and made their way across the base using routes that avoided the main thoroughfares. Corinne moved through the shadows with the ease of someone who had spent years operating in darkness. Her body remembered the rhythms, even if her mind had tried to forget them. The cargo staging area was a large concrete pad adjacent to the flight line, surrounded by chain-link fencing and illuminated by harsh floodlights. A C-130 transport sat on the tarmac nearby, its rear cargo ramp lowered in preparation for loading. Corinne and Okonkwo took position behind a maintenance vehicle about 50 meters from the staging area. From there, they had a clear view of the cargo containers and the personnel moving around them. Hutchins arrived first. He was alone, walking quickly, his head swiveling as he scanned the area. He looked nervous, jumpy, the body language of a man who knew he was doing something wrong. He approached one of the cargo containers and produced a key from his pocket. The container was marked with standard military shipping labels, but Hutchins opened it and began rummaging inside with the familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. He is checking the merchandise, Corinne whispered. Okonkwo nodded, his eyes fixed on the scene. Wait for it. A vehicle approached from the direction of the flight line. A military SUV with its headlights dimmed. It pulled up next to the container, and Captain Dorn stepped out. Corinne felt her jaw tighten. There he is. Dorn walked over to Hutchins, and the two men spoke in low voices. Their postures were tense, argumentative. Hutchins kept gesturing toward the main base, clearly agitated about something. They're arguing about whether to proceed, Okonkwo said. Hutchins wants to abort. Dorn is pushing back. The argument continued for several minutes. Finally, Dorn grabbed Hutchins by the collar and said something that made the sergeant go pale. Hutchins nodded quickly, and Dorn released him. Whatever Dorn said, it worked. Hutchins returned to the container and began pulling out smaller cases, loading them into the back of the SUV. That is not going to the aircraft, Corinne said. They are diverting it right now. Okonkwo keyed his radio. All units, stand by. Targets are loading diverted equipment into a military SUV. Prepare to move on my signal. He turned to Corinne. We need to get closer. I want audio of their conversation if possible. They moved forward, using the shadows between the floodlights to conceal their approach. They made it to within 20 meters of the SUV before Corinne's foot caught on a loose piece of gravel. The sound was small, barely audible, but Hutchins heard it. He spun around, his hand going to the sidearm on his belt. Who is there? Corinne and Okonkwo froze. Dorn stepped around the SUV, his own weapon drawn. Come out. Now. For a moment, no one moved. Then Corinne made a decision. She stepped out of the shadows, her hands raised. Dorn's face twisted with recognition and rage. You. I should have known. Captain Dorn, Corinne said calmly. I think it is time we had an honest conversation. Hutchins raised his weapon, aiming directly at her chest. Sir, we need to shut this down. Right now. Dorn hesitated. His eyes flicked between Corinne and the darkness behind her, trying to determine if she was alone. She is bluffing, he said finally. She does not have anything. Just a washed-up contractor with a chip on her shoulder. Corinne kept her hands raised, but her voice was steady. I have photographs of altered shipping records. I have timestamps proving documentation was changed after delivery confirmations. I have a pattern analysis showing 18 months of systematic theft. And in about 30 seconds, I'm going to have video evidence of you loading stolen military equipment into your personal vehicle. Dorn's face went white. Okonkwo stepped out of the shadows behind her. And she has me. The colonel's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Hutchins's weapon wavered. Dorn took a step back. It is over, Captain, Okonkwo said. Military police are surrounding this position. Criminal Investigation Command has been monitoring this operation for the past 3 hours. You can put down your weapons and come quietly, or you can make this much worse for yourselves. For a long moment, the standoff held. Corinne could see Dorn calculating, trying to find an angle, an escape, a way to spin this in his favor. Then Hutchins did something unexpected. He swung his weapon toward Okonkwo. "Sir, if we take out the colonel, we can still salvage this. Make it look like a robbery. Blame on locals." Dorn stared at his sergeant. For a moment, Corinne thought he might actually consider it. Then the floodlights blazed on, and a dozen military police officers emerged from positions around the staging area. Weapons drawn. Command shouted. The chaos of a coordinated takedown. Hutchins dropped his weapon immediately. Dorn held on for 2 more seconds, his face a mask of disbelief, before letting his sidearm clatter to the ground. "Captain Wesley Dorn," Okonkwo said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you are under arrest for theft of military property, conspiracy, and conduct unbecoming an officer. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." Corinne watched as the military police moved in, securing both men. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. It was over. Almost. The hours after the arrest blurred together in a haze of interrogations, statements, and paperwork. Corinne sat in a small office in the military police headquarters, answering the same questions over and over while investigators pieced together the scope of the conspiracy. Hutchins broke within the first hour. He gave up everything. Names, dates, account numbers, the full extent of his involvement, and everyone who had helped him along the way. The picture that emerged was worse than Corinne had imagined. The theft operation had been running for nearly 2 years. Dorn had recruited Hutchins shortly after arriving at Camp Humphreys, recognizing in the bitter sergeant a useful combination of access and resentment. Together, they had diverted over $3 million worth of military equipment through a network of falsified documents and complicit personnel. The equipment flowed to Dorn's father's company, Westmark Logistics, where it was relabeled and sold to private military contractors throughout Asia. The profits were split between the conspirators through a series of offshore accounts that investigators were still tracing. But the most damaging revelation came near dawn, when Hutchins finally admitted the full truth about why Dorn had targeted Corinne so aggressively. She was asking the right questions, Hutchins said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. The first day she arrived, she started looking at manifests that nobody had looked at in months. Dorn panicked. He said we had to get rid of her before she figured it out. So the complaint was never about the helicopter seat, the investigator said. Hutchins shook his head. It was about shutting her down, making her look crazy so nobody would believe her if she started talking about missing equipment. Corinne listened to the recording of the interrogation from the adjacent room. Okonkwo stood beside her, his face grim. He tried to destroy your reputation to protect a smuggling operation, Okonkwo said quietly. Everything he did to you was calculated. I know. Corinne's voice was flat. I suspected as much after the first day. His reaction was too strong for a simple seat dispute. Why did you not say anything? Because I did not have proof. And because I have learned that accusations without evidence only make things worse. The door opened, and a criminal investigation command agent entered. Colonel, Ms. Vashon, we have a development. She handed Okonkwo a tablet, displaying a series of financial records. Westmark Logistics has been flagged by Treasury for suspicious transactions. The investigation is expanding to include Colonel retired Bernard Dorn and at least 4 other individuals connected to the company. Okonkwo scrolled through the records. This goes all the way to the top. Yes, sir. The agent's expression was carefully neutral. We are coordinating with federal prosecutors. This is going to be a major case. What about Lieutenant Colonel Ferris? Corinne asked. The agent hesitated. Her involvement appears to be limited to negligence rather than active participation. She failed to act on warning signs, possibly due to her personal connection to the Dorn family. But we have no evidence that she profited from the scheme or knowingly facilitated it. So she skates. That will be for the command to decide. The agent collected the tablet. In the meantime, we need both of you to remain available for additional questioning. This investigation is going to take months to fully unravel. She left, and Corinne and Okonkwo sat in silence for a long moment. The sun was rising outside the window. A new day at Camp Humphreys, but everything had changed. "You should get some rest," Okonkwo said finally. "You have been awake for over 24 hours. So have you." He smiled slightly. "I have practice. Comes with the job." Corinne stood and walked to the window. The flight line was visible in the distance. Helicopters lined up in neat rows, crews beginning their morning routines. Somewhere out there, the soldiers who had mocked her were waking up to news that would reshape their understanding of everything that had happened. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we let the system work." Okonkwo joined her at the window. "Dorn will face court-martial. His father will face federal charges. The equipment that can be recovered will be returned to military inventory. And the people who were hurt by this operation will get some measure of justice. And me?" Okonkwo turned to face her. "That depends on what you want." Corinne considered the question. For 23 years, she had wanted only one thing: to serve quietly and honor the memory of the people she had lost, to wear the patch and remember without asking for recognition. But something had shifted in the past few days, something she could not quite name. "I want to finish what I started," she said slowly. "Not just this investigation. All of it. The work I have been doing in the shadows for 2 decades. I want it to matter. It has always mattered. But no one knew." She touched the patch on her jacket. "Marcus knew. The people we served with knew. But the world forgot about us the moment the missions were classified. We became ghosts." Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. "There is a ceremony scheduled for next month. Joint Special Operations personnel from across the Pacific Theater. I was planning to use it to recognize outstanding contributions to the command." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Task Force Erebus has been partially declassified. Not the operational details, but the existence of the unit and the general nature of its service. I have been authorized to publicly acknowledge the contributions of its members for the first time." Corinne felt something shift in her chest. "After all this time, I want you to speak at the ceremony." Okonkwo's voice was gentle but firm. "I want you to tell their story. Marcus's story. The story of the 11 who did not come home, and the 12 who have been carrying their memory ever since." Corinne stared at him. 23 years of silence. 23 years of keeping the pain locked away, hidden behind a faded patch and a quiet life. Was she ready to break that silence? Was she ready to let the world see what she had been carrying? She thought of Marcus, of his final order. "Keep going, Reaper. Get them home." She had gotten them home. All of them except him. Maybe it was time to bring him home, too. "Yes," she said quietly. "I will do it." Okonkwo nodded. "Then let us make sure their story is told right." The ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning 3 weeks later. The base auditorium had been transformed for the occasion, filled with folding chairs arranged in precise rows and decorated with the flags of every service branch represented in the Pacific Theater. Over 200 special operations personnel had gathered from bases across Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and Guam. They sat in dress uniforms, their ribbons and badges catching the light from the overhead fixtures. Generals and admirals occupied the front row alongside senior enlisted leaders whose combined experience spanned decades of conflict. Corinne stood backstage, wearing a simple dark suit with a single piece of decoration: the patch. She had considered leaving it in her quarters, letting her words speak for themselves. But in the end, she could not do it. The patch was not about her. It never had been. It belonged to the 11 who would never speak for themselves. Colonel Okonkwo found her in the wings, reviewing her notes one final time. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified." She looked up at him. "I have conducted operations in hostile territory without breaking a sweat. But this might actually kill me." Okonkwo smiled. "You will be fine. Just tell the truth. That is all anyone can ask." The ceremony began with the usual formalities. National anthem. Invocation. Welcoming remarks from the theater commander. Corinne listened from backstage, her heart rate climbing with each passing minute. Then Okonkwo took the podium, and the tone shifted. 23 years ago, he began, I was a young captain assigned to a unit that did not officially exist. Task Force Erebus. Some of you have heard rumors about this unit. Some of you have clearances high enough to know more than rumors. But until recently, no one outside that small circle knew the full truth of what happened during our operations. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. Tonight, I'm authorized to share part of that truth. Not the operational details, which remain classified, but the human story. The story of 23 Americans who volunteered for missions that could never be acknowledged, knowing that if they died, their sacrifice would be buried alongside them. Corinne watched through a gap in the curtain as Okonkwo described the unit's formation, its purpose, the caliber of operator required to serve in its ranks. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience. 11 members of Task Force Erebus gave their lives in service to this country. Their names do not appear on any public memorial. Their families received folded flags and condolence letters that could not explain the true nature of their sacrifice. For 23 years, they have been honored only in the memories of those who served beside them. He turned toward the stage wing, where Corinne waited. Tonight, we begin to change that. And the person who will tell their story is someone who earned the right to speak for them in a way that no one else could. She carried wounded operators through 3 kilometers of enemy territory under fire. She lost her husband in the same operation that saved my life and the lives of 10 other Americans. She has worn the Erebus patch every day for 23 years, not for recognition, but for remembrance. He extended his hand toward the curtain. Ladies and gentlemen, retired Master Sergeant Corinne Vachon, call sign Reaper. The applause began before she reached the podium. Corinne walked across the stage on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, focusing on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. She reached the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Operators, warriors, people who understood sacrifice in ways that civilians never could. She took a breath and began. My husband's name was Marcus Vachon. He was a master sergeant in the Marine Corps, and he was the finest man I have ever known. Her voice was steady, stronger than she had expected. Marcus was one of the original members of Task Force Erebus. He believed in the mission. He believed in the people he served with. And on the night of October 17th, 23 years ago, he gave his life so that 11 of us could survive. She told the story, not the classified details, but the human truth. The ambush that caught them in a valley with no air support. The desperate fight through enemy positions. The wounded who could not walk and the operators who carried them anyway. She named the 11 who died. One by one, she spoke their names into the silence of the auditorium. Staff Sergeant William Chun, Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Moreau, Chief Petty Officer David Rennick, Sergeant First Class Thomas Aguilar, Staff Sergeant Jerome Washington, Technical Sergeant Michael Kowalski, Petty Officer Second Class Sandra Yee, Sergeant Ricardo Delgado, Staff Sergeant Brian Tompkins, Corporal Natasha Volkov, Master Sergeant Marcus Vachon. She paused after each name, letting them hang in the air like prayers. These 11 Americans gave everything. They did not do it for medals or recognition. They did it because they believed that some things are worth dying for. Freedom, honor, the lives of the people standing beside them. Her hand went to the patch on her jacket. This patch belonged to my husband. He gave it to me in the helicopter as he was dying. His last words were in order. Keep going, Reaper. Get them home. Her voice finally cracked. I have spent 23 years trying to honor that order, trying to keep going, trying to get people home. And for 23 years, I have carried the weight of the 11 who did not make it. The weight of Marcus. The weight of his sacrifice that the world was never allowed to know about. She looked out at the audience. Many of them had tears in their eyes. Hardened operators who had seen the worst of humanity, weeping openly for comrades they had never met. Today, that changes. Today, the world learns that Task Force Erebus existed. That 23 Americans served in its ranks. That 11 of them gave their lives in defense of this country. And that their sacrifice mattered. She straightened her shoulders. To the families of the fallen, I want you to know that your sons and daughters, your husbands and wives, your mothers and fathers, were heroes in the truest sense of the word. They cannot receive the public recognition they deserve, but they will never be forgotten by those of us who served beside them. She saluted the audience. A crisp, perfect salute held for a long moment. Keep going. Get them home. That was Marcus's last order, and I intend to follow it for the rest of my life. The auditorium erupted in applause. Standing ovation. 200 warriors on their feet, honoring the woman who had carried their brothers and sisters through the darkness. Corinne held the salute until her arm ached. Then she lowered her hand, touched the patch one final time, and walked off the stage. The reception after the ceremony was held in a large hall adjacent to the auditorium. Corinne stood near the back, accepting handshakes and quiet words of gratitude from operators who had been moved by her speech. Each interaction felt surreal, like she was watching herself from a distance. 23 years of silence, broken in 15 minutes. She was speaking with a Navy SEAL lieutenant commander when she noticed Lieutenant Colonel Ferris enter the room. The woman looked different than she had during their last encounter. Smaller somehow. The rigid posture had softened, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested sleepless nights. Ferris spotted Corinne and hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like she might turn and leave. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked over. Ms. Vashon, may I speak with you privately? Corinne excused herself from the conversation and followed Ferris to a quiet corner near the emergency exit. I watched your speech, Ferris said. Her voice was subdued. I did not know about any of it. The unit, your service, what you sacrificed. You did not ask. No, I did not. Ferris met her eyes. I took Captain Dorn's word because it was easier than questioning someone connected to powerful people. I'll let you be humiliated and harassed because I was protecting my own career. That was wrong. Corinne studied the woman in front of her. She could see the genuine remorse beneath the formal words. The weight of choices that could not be undone. What happens to you now? Corinne asked. I have been relieved of my position pending review. Ferris's voice was flat. I will probably be allowed to retire quietly rather than face formal charges. The investigation found no evidence that I profited from the theft or knew about it directly. But I failed in my duty to investigate warning signs. That failure enabled criminals to operate under my command. And you came here to tell me this? I came here to apologize. Ferris took a breath. What Captain Dorn did to you was unconscionable. What I allowed to happen was nearly as bad. You deserve better, and I am sorry. The words hung in the air between them. Corinne thought about all the times she had been dismissed, underestimated, and disrespected by people who assumed they knew her worth at a glance. She thought about the rage she had carried for days, the cold fury that had sustained her through the investigation and the confrontation. And she thought about Marcus, about his belief that people could change, that redemption was possible for anyone willing to seek it. I accept your apology, she said finally. What matters now is what you do next. Ferris nodded slowly. Thank you. That is more than I deserve. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of uniforms. Corinne watched her go, feeling something release in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. The beginning of letting go. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Mom? She turned to find Private First Class Osei standing behind her, wearing dress blues that looked freshly pressed. The young woman was beaming. Private. Corinne felt a genuine smile cross her face. You clean up well. Thank you, ma'am. Osei's excitement was barely contained. I have news. I got accepted. Combat Arms Selection. I start training next month. Corinne felt a warmth spread through her chest. That is outstanding, Private. Congratulations. I wanted to thank you. Osei's voice grew serious. That first day, when you stopped those soldiers from giving me a hard time, and everything after, you showed me what it looks like to keep going when everyone is trying to make you quit. You did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction. Osei shook her head. It was more than that. You believed in me when I was not sure I believed in myself. That matters. Corinne placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. You're going to do great things, Private Osei. I can see it in you. The same fire that carried me through 22 years of service. Do not let anyone extinguish it. I will not. Osei straightened to attention and rendered a sharp salute. Thank you, Master Sergeant. For everything. Corinne returned the salute, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. Carry on, private, and make us proud. Osei grinned and disappeared into the crowd, practically bouncing with excitement. Corinne watched her go, thinking about the doors that had been closed to women like them for so long. The barriers that had been broken down by sacrifice and persistence, and the refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. Osei would face her own challenges, her own Captain Dorrance, her own moments of doubt and despair. But she would also have something that Corinne had lacked for most of her career. She would have proof that it was possible, that women could serve at the highest levels, that the door was open for anyone with the courage to walk through it. Chief Warrant Officer Yoon found her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, Yoon said, handing her one. You thought right. Corinne took a grateful sip. Thank you for everything you did, coming to me with information about Hutchins, believing me when the evidence was against me. Yoon shrugged. I knew something was wrong. I just needed someone to give me permission to act on it. And now I'm putting in for flight medic training. Yoon smiled. Watching you stand up to Dorn made me realize I've been playing it safe for too long. It is time to push myself. Corinne raised her coffee cup. To pushing ourselves. Yoon clinked her cup against Corinne's. To pushing ourselves. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the crowd of warriors mingle and share stories. Colonel Okonkwo approached a few minutes later, his expression thoughtful. There is someone who wants to meet you, he said. They came a long way. Corinne frowned. Who? Okonkwo stepped aside, revealing an elderly couple standing behind him. The woman had silver hair and kind eyes. The man stood with the rigid posture of a career military officer, though age had softened his frame. Corinne's heart stopped. She recognized them from photographs, from memorial service 23 years ago, from the faces she had tried so hard to forget because looking at them hurt too much. Marcus's parents. The woman stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. You're Corinne, she said. Our son's wife. The woman who tried to save him. Corinne could not speak, could not move, could only stand there as 23 years of grief crashed over her like a wave. We never got to thank you, the woman continued, for loving him, for being with him at the end, for carrying his memory all these years. She reached in her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. This was meant for both of you. The medal they could never award because the mission was classified. But now that the truth is coming out, we want you to have it. She pressed the box into Corinne's trembling hands. Corinne opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a silver star. The citation beneath it bore 2 names. Master Sergeant Marcus Vashon. Master Sergeant Corinne Vashon. It was always meant for you both, Marcus's mother said softly. Now it can finally be yours. Corinne clutched the medal to her chest and wept. The weeks following the ceremony passed in a blur of interviews, depositions, and quiet moments of reflection. Captain Wesley Dorn's court-martial proceedings began in early November, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Testimony from Hutchins. Financial records tracing the stolen equipment through his father's company. Documentation of the systematic campaign to discredit Corinne when she got too close to the truth. He was convicted on all counts. Theft of military property, conspiracy, conduct unbecoming an officer, false official statements. The sentence was 12 years at Fort Leavenworth and a dishonorable discharge that would follow him for the rest of his life. His father faced federal charges that carried even heavier penalties. The Westmark Logistics empire crumbled as investigators traced the full scope of the corruption. Contracts were revoked. Assets were seized. The name Dorn, once synonymous with military service and family honor, became synonymous with betrayal. Corinne did not attend the sentencing. She had said everything she needed to say on the witness stand. The rest was for the system to handle. Instead, she spent her days at Camp Humphreys in a new role. Colonel Okonkwo had offered her a position as a special advisor to his Joint Operations Command. Official status, real authority, the ability to identify problems and fix them without navigating the bureaucratic obstacles that had nearly destroyed her. She accepted. Her first project was establishing a mentorship program for female service members pursuing combat roles. She thought of Osei every time she reviewed applications, remembering the young private who had needed someone to believe in her. There were hundreds more like her throughout the Pacific Theater. Women with fire in their eyes and doubt in their hearts, wondering if they had what it took. Corinne made it her mission to show them they did. Chief Warrant Officer Yoon stopped by her office on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the ceremony. She was wearing a new patch on her flight suit, the insignia of a qualified flight medic. "I passed," Yoon said, grinning. "Top of my class." Corinne rose from her desk and embraced her. "I never doubted you for a second. I doubted myself plenty." Yoon pulled back, her expression turning serious. "But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about you. Standing on that flight line, while Dorn tried to humiliate you. Never breaking, never backing down. You found your own strength. I just showed you where to look." Yoon shook her head. "You did more than that. You showed me what courage looks like when it is quiet, when nobody is watching, when the easy thing would be to walk away." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small challenge coin. The emblem on it was a skull with wings. Roman numeral 3. "Colonel Okonkwo had these made," Yoon said, "for the people who helped bring down Dorn. He said you should be the one to give them out." Corinne took the coin, running her thumb over the familiar design. A new generation of the Erebus emblem. Different mission, same meaning. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Yoon smiled. "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." She left, and Corinne sat alone in her office, holding the coin and thinking about the strange path that had brought her here. 23 years of silence. 23 years of carrying the weight alone. And now, finally, she was surrounded by people who understood, who shared the burden, who would carry the memory forward when she was gone. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come." The door opened to reveal a young woman in civilian clothes. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest like a shield. Her contractor badge identified her as a new arrival. Logistics coordination. The same role Corinne had held when this all began. "Ms. Vashon?" The young woman's voice was hesitant. "I am sorry to bother you. I just arrived on base yesterday, and I am having trouble getting access to the systems I need. The sergeant at the admin office said my credentials are not in the database yet, and nobody seems to know how to fix it." Corinne studied her. The woman was young, probably late 20s, eager, uncertain, the kind of person who would be easy to dismiss, easy to ignore, easy to mock. "What is your name?" "Jennifer Castellan, Mom. I am supposed to be coordinating equipment transfers for the forward logistics points." Corinne rose from her desk. "Come with me." "Mom, I am going to walk you over to admin and make sure your credentials are processed today." Corinne grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair. "And then I'm going to introduce you to the people you need to know. The ones who will actually help you do your job instead of making you jump through hoops." Castellan's eyes widened. "You do not have to do that. I do not want to be a bother." Corinne paused at the door and looked back at her. "Ms. Castellan, I spent 3 days on this base being told I did not belong. Being mocked, being dismissed, having my credentials questioned by people who never bothered to look past their own assumptions." She touched the patch on her jacket. "I made a promise a long time ago to keep going and get people home. That promise does not just apply to combat operations. It applies to every person who needs help navigating a system designed to make them feel small." She opened the door and gestured for Castellan to follow. "Now come on. We have work to do." They walked out of the building together into the bright afternoon sun. The flight line was visible in the distance, helicopters lifting off in formation against a cloudless sky. Corinne watched them climb and disappear over the hills. She thought about Marcus, about the order he had given her with his dying breath, about the 23 years she had spent honoring it in silence. "Keep going, Reaper. Get them home." She had kept going. She had gotten them home. The wounded operators she had carried through the desert. The soldiers whose equipment she had protected from thieves. The young women she had mentored and believed in when no one else would. And now, walking beside a nervous contractor who reminded her of herself 3 decades ago, she understood that the mission would never really be over. There would always be someone who needed help, someone who needed an advocate, someone who needed to see that it was possible to stand up to injustice and win. The patch on her jacket caught the sunlight, the faded emblem barely visible against the worn fabric. Marcus will be proud. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know what resonated most with you. Maybe you know someone whose true worth was hidden beneath a humble surface. Or maybe you have witnessed a moment when courage changed everything. We would love to hear your story. Corinne Vachon walked across the base with her head high and her shoulders straight, ready for whatever came next. The mission continued.